citrus program. And we'll bring those in, and those will actually cube up and use some of the zest and some of the whole fruits. We actually pull some of the juice in there as well.
So that's like the last thing that goes in.
Yeah, because you don't want it to boil for too long because the flavor will basically dissipate. Or if you're using things like ginger or herbs, they'll overpower the beer. So you want it to be a nuance. You don't want it to be a defining characteristic. You want the beer to come through. Some breweries have an opposite mentality. They want it to taste completely like, whatever they're adding in, and it kind of faults the base beer. You're doing shame to the beer itself. So we like the beer to stand on its own and have that as something that complements the base flavors.
Ryan?
Yeah.
It's true you can get like citrus flavors from certain hops and stuff like that?
Absolutely. So that's where Paladin is a really good example of that. It has a really distinct grapefruit flavor to it. There is no grapefruit in it. We've done work with the citrus program and then Grow Riverside, and we've brought that the last 2 years, and everyone swears there's grapefruit in it. There is none. Citra is known for that. It is a very grapefruity hop. So those oils, depending on the levels of them, and I'll show you, we have a chart over here. When we get those reports, I told you we get those lab reports when the hops come in, we can actually see what the flavor of the hop will be based on how the oils are, because there's 4 or 5 different oils that'll get measured. So we can see, depending on what level of each one, kind of what the flavors are going to be. So our flavor, and really you don't even have to be able to taste beer to be able to brew good beer if you understand it on that level. So it's really kind of fun. We take it to a very, very scientific level with beer brewing. This is also really important when you're brewing a beer over and over again each year. And this is one of the primary distinctions that I find between beer and wine. Is wine, you have good years, you have bad years, and it is very, very, very much influenced by the weather and basically what the grape crop is for that year. What is the Brix level in that grape? What did they get the different flavor, those polyflavonoids to come through? Like, how is it going to be when they do it? Here, we get a lab report, so we can actually take that hop year after year. If it comes in stronger this year, we can adjust our recipe so it tastes exactly the same. So we take those recipes to a very technical level. Usually the first batch that we do will be, I would say, almost like a pilot batch. But at this point, since we've done so many through, we have a pretty good idea how all the hops and malts will play with each other. But that's something that when we find a recipe that we like, we can repeat that ad infinitum. Sierra Nevada's Pale Ale is a really good example. That beer has been the same for the last 15 years. It is Sierra Nevada Pale Ale, Sierra Nevada Pale Ale. You get it this year, you get it next year. There is no year on most of your beers. There are some, but most of them you're not going to find that because we can repeat it. The ones that you will find years and dates on more so on your IPAs, you're going to find it because you want to make sure that the hops are fresh, and I'm going to get into that in a second. And on barrel-aged beers, because the barrels will change and how they influence a beer will change from year to year. Firestone Walker has a really great program, and they have theirs listed by year, but it's because those barrels will change a little bit each year. So that's kind of a wild card that we can't control.
Are you guys doing any barrel-aged right now? Yeah, all right.
We are, and that program is going to be expanding here very, very quickly. So getting back to the fermentation, the beer transfers over. In between batches, this is why all of our equipment, you'll notice, is stainless steel. The inside of these tanks are stainless steel. They're just copper clad. So it's more for looks than anything else. Everything is stainless steel. The same reason, and the guys from Chef's Toys will tell you, stainless steel is very easy to clean. On a microscopic level, it's perfectly smooth. You can wipe it off. It won't harbor bacteria. It doesn't harbor any flavors, and that's why we use it here in the brewing world as well. So it's very easy to clean. So when we go into our fermentation tank, in between batches, these guys go through an acid bath, hot water bath, and a sanitizer bath. So inside that thing, we didn't actually purge the entire thing with CO2 and pressurize it. So it is impossible for there to be any kind of microbe in there unless we want it to be, which is where the yeast comes in. The yeast is basically going to infect the beer intentionally, so we can actually control how the beer goes bad. So that beer goes in. Since it's boiled, the liquid itself is sanitary. We don't want to have any outside contaminants, so we actually used compressed oxygen, and that goes in line. So we take the oxygen, we actually use bottled oxygen, which is those green tanks right over there. So that goes in line as it's transferring over. So there's actually no outside air that will touch the beer until it comes out of the tap. degrees. So kind of a fun fact for you. Beer goes in, yeast is in there, yeast starts eating all of those sugars. Most of your ale yeasts are top fermenting, so they sit on the top of the beer. Starts eating all of that, and you will start getting a couple things happening during fermentation. Really quickly, you're going to start seeing carbon dioxide being kicked off, which is why we have these pipes coming off the top. So these go down into barrels filled with a Star San solution. It's a sanitizing solution. It's basically food-safe bleach. You can actually drink this stuff. It probably wouldn't do anything worse than give you the squirts, I'd imagine. But it doesn't taste good. It tastes like salt water. But what it does is it allows all of that pressure to come off without anything being able to get back up into the beer. So during that fermentation, again, the CO2 is being kicked off. We're getting all of the alcohol produced, which is the main thing that we're looking for. The other thing that happens is you get a tremendous amount of heat generated. So all of these tanks are glycol jacketed. That same 24 to 27 degree glycol that we use to chill the beer down also keeps the beer at temp. So we have a control panel over on the wall over here. So the red is the actual temperature, the green is our set point. So you'll see that there are 3 tanks that are actively fermenting right now, this one, and the farthest one. The big tank, which is the other one on the bottom, is empty right now because we're going to be prepping for another bottling run here pretty soon. So that one is actually the only empty tank that we have. You also notice that there's one that's sitting at 39 degrees. So you may be wondering what's going on there. Well, after the yeast has finished eating all of the sugars, we do what's called a cold crash. So we take it from that 68 degrees and drop it down into the mid 30s. And if any of you guys have ever made fresh juice and then put it in the fridge, you notice it separates. So that's exactly what we do is we then, as that yeast goes dormant, when it gets cold, it drops to the bottom. So will any kind of little pop particles or anything that's in there will all drop down to the bottom, which is why all of these are conical. It funnels it all down so that we can then pull it off. The yeast we will actually harvest and repitch into future batches. We usually go about 6 generations for each strain of yeast. The beer is then clear. We can carbonate it and it's ready to serve. So we can then take it, transfer it to our serving tanks. We can put it into kegs, bottle it, wherever it's going to be going into. Now I mentioned the dating and how hops you want them fresh. This is something that kind of parallels wine. White wine, can drink it fresh. It's not going to make any difference whether you have it the date it's bottled or 2 years from now. There's really going to be no flavor difference. Your red wines, however, you do want to let them sit because you want those tannins to break down. You want it to be a nice, smooth, complex red wine. Same thing happens with hops, is they break down. So we want to drink it like white wine. We want it fresh. We want those tannins in there. They will mellow out, which is where your barrel-aged beers come in. So those, usually they're darker beers. And so think of them, again, like red wine. You want them to sit in a barrel, mature, all of that stuff that would be any kind of a bite. You want it to mellow out and break down. And that way, when you drink it, it's really smooth and also complex. Most of your darker beers are actually will drink better at the temperature that you'd be drinking red wine, so like mid-50s or something. I like drinking them cold, letting them sit, ordering another beer, like a pale ale or something, and then coming back to it and trying it later because the flavor profile completely changes. So it's like drinking a red wine cold. It masks all the goodness. You need to let it open up. Same thing with like really any alcohol that's made in barrels. So like whiskeys, cognacs, all those types of things are actually much better at room temperature because they can open up. You can get all of the aromatics and all the flavor off of it. So cool. You guys got any questions? I threw a lot at you right there, but.
What are you brewing at this guy? Or what's
So
fermenting?
this is our blonde. It's actually our first blonde that we've ever done. We had too many people complaining about it, so we were like, fine, we'll brew a blonde.